weird. Monkey sometimes. I am. So Kathleen says she has some issue with the public safety committee she needs to speak to you about. Okay. No sec.
Hey,
What's up?
I just saw an email that both Eliezer and Jumina aren't going to the meeting.
That they're not gonna attend the meeting? Hold on. Yeah. but Jacob is running the meeting.
Oh.
Well, I didn't even get those two emails that you're referring to. When Ebenezer left, he told me Eliasar was not coming. We sent him a meeting. We were waiting for Jumina,
That's
but
for
when
mini
Jacob
me.
got here, I told him that Eliasar was not gonna be here. And I'm not sure about Jumina because I've never even met her. No, I just told him like Eliasar is probably not gonna be here. That's what Ebenezer said. He said, is Jumir not coming? I said, I don't know. And then he's like, okay, well, he kind of took ownership of it and he's handling it. But I thought that he was
How you doing?
like allowed to do that.
You are, we're all set.
Well, they're on their meeting. Like Alvin is here, Sonia is here. You,
Emily,
yeah, they've been on in the meeting for 30 minutes already.
what? No, there's not.
But it's on YouTube, so you can double check and see how it's.
I didn't do my homework.
But I didn't get those emails, so I don't even.
Well, you're with Columbia. 2019.
I see. I see. The first one is.
Like, that's been a problem.
All right.
Like,
This is my issue. This is the reason I joined the
Oh,
committee.
you're thinking ATC?
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry. I got this.
Further discussion of the writing.
Yeah, so the cable for this is a little bit weird. Just try not to move it.
Yeah, because I did move the owl over a bit. Yeah.
You shouldn't have to not move it.
Excuse me, Wayne, but I couldn't hear anything.
We are muted. We haven't started yet.
Oh, oh, okay. Now I can hear you and you can hear me, obviously.
Try to get faster, but whatever. It's good not to be so neurotic, if I can help it.
So.
Oh my God, we have people here. Andrew. Hi. Hey.
So good evening, all. I'm going to call the meeting to order. It is what?
7:05.
7:06?
7:05.
Thank you so much. So I'm Wayne Benjamin. I chair land use for Manhattan Community Board 12. Welcome to the November committee meeting. Before we get into the agenda, I'd like to have my committee members introduce themselves. So starting at my far left.
Hi, everyone. I'm Heidi Guzman. I am the assistant chair of this committee.
I'm Vivian Ducat. I am for about 15 years, I've been a public member of this committee. And I live in Southern Washington Heights, otherwise known as Lower.
Otherwise just known as Washington Heights.
Lower Washington Heights.
To my right,
My name is Daniel Bonilla. I also committee Parks and Cultural Affairs, and I'm an artist.
I'm Tracy McNeil. I'm also obviously on land use, on bylaws, on parks and cultural affairs. Live in Lower Washington Heights, also known as Washington Heights.
thank you. And online, we have two committee members. Jim?
Hi there. I apologize for not being there in person, but I did an inordinate amount of walking today and my foot hurts too much at the moment, but I'm basically fine. I'm the board parliamentarian. I'm also on the Traffic and Transportation Committee and the Bylaws Task Force, and I am happy to be here with you electronically.
And Indiana? Although you are muted and your camera is off.
Yep.
There you are.
Hi all. My name is Indiana Porta, and I am on this committee as well as as well as housing and human services. Thank you.
Okay, and we also have a former land use member and another community board member, and that is Steve Simon.
Where's Steve?
Steve is online, and I've just promoted him to panelist so he can say hello. Steve, why don't you introduce yourself?
I think you already did that. I'm Steve Simon. I'm a former member of the Land Use Committee, and I'm still a member of Committee Board 12.
Thank you. So we've got two items on the agenda, both of which are outgrowths of ongoing activities. The first one is a further discussion of the former Rite Aid site, and I circulated to the committee and extra copies, a resolution that land use passed, and someone needs to mute themselves, who's online, concerning the site, where basically we're pointing out that it's a large, or one of the larger privately owned site that is available for development. It has been an eyesore in the community for a while. Pursuant to existing zoning, not needing any changes, you could build residential, community facility, and commercial uses there. And we're calling upon John Casamasides, who is the owner of that, at Spread Apple Chain, to, undertake a mixed-use development that includes, residential with ground floor, retail and community facility space. I believe it was in the context of discussing Mark Levine's Housing Manhattanites plan last February or March. We discussed this site, and we discussed sort of reaffirming our support for this resolution, since nothing has really happened. But I think some committee members thought we might want to take a second look at the type of development we're asking for. But it occurred to me after we discussed the site again last month that there'd been no input on what, other ideas community members have. So I wanted to not allow this just to continue to sit. And there is such a need for residential development. I think it still makes sense to advocate for a mixed-use development that is residential, but also makes use of the fact that the ground floor can be, retail or community facility. But we might want to add to this something that we were discussing last month, which is the site is not being maintained well. And in the interim, we can also call upon, or should also call upon, the property owner to maintain the site consistent with all applicable laws.
We've done this before.
Yeah, but so my point is, I don't think we should talk about things and let them sit and not act on them. So, we were discussing reaffirming this resolution sometime early last year. We put it on pause to get input, which didn't come. So we discussed the site again last month, so I'm gonna bring it back to the table. Does it make sense to reaffirm this resolution with, the added caveats that this site continues to be an eyesore, since 2019. And in addition to calling for development in the interim, the property should be maintained consistent with the law.
I would say that it's actually a horrible place to live. I think you're in a traffic island with it's sort of one of these
You mean like Green Island?
cars. Not quite. But it seems to be yet another one of these affordable housing developments that are being put in less desirable places. I don't know that I would want to live there.
Other thoughts?
I have so many thoughts. I'm going to try to put to bullet points. This is the reason I joined this committee, is this actual unused lot. So much so that it has been unmaintained for so long. Where Rite Aid moved to is now closed. So I don't know how many years we're at. We're easily over 5. We might be closer to 9 or 10. But whether it's mixed use, my point is that something needs to be done to go to the in accordance with the law point. It is a nuisance. And why is it a public nuisance? It's a public nuisance. Not only does it invite rodents and things and stuff, because it's just growing and it grows unaffected until someone calls 311 enough and then they come and cut it down. But you can clearly see animals sort of routing and rooting through there, and other R words. I don't know. Additionally, because it is not maintained, it does invite people to just hang out. And as a native of Washington Heights, I understand block culture. I feel it, but with nobody maintaining it, that means it's constant garbage. Nobody picks it up. small additional anecdote that my small son, who's 6, no longer wants to walk on that block because he says it's so dirty, I trip. That's not anything but, another community member's voice. Whether, again, I'm gonna throw out, like, there has been rumor, and rumor means nothing, that there's issues with whether or not the land itself can support a building that was on the rumor mill. I know you're looking at me like, girl, what you talking about? I'm just throwing out everything, and we're gonna see what sticks. That's supposedly why Rite Aid moved in the first place, because they said that because of the trains that were going under, the building was coming unsteady. So this is where I'm going. I don't want us to say it has to be mixed use, and then we come back with there's some hum and a ho reasons why that can't be done. My whole point is that something needs to be done with the lot that is beneficial to the community, and not detrimental. I see the floor.
Right. I see Jim Berlin and then Steve Simon, but before we get to that, the issue of the structural stability of the because we discussed that in 2019 and before. But the point is, any new structure would be built consistent with the building code, and anytime you are near the MTA, you coordinate with them. So whatever the issue may have been with the building from 1930, whatever, would not be the issue with the new building. And think about it, we're in Manhattan. There are buildings that are over, subway tracks all over the
No, I
island.
want to be clear. Supposedly, the issue is not with the building itself. The issue is with the land. This is the hustle. I'm just saying
Yeah.
all the hustles, so we aware of
Yeah,
all
we-
the
we-
hustles
we-
that are gonna come.
Yeah, we've heard that.
Yeah.
Jim, Steve.
Thank you. Let me comment on the hustle. The subway, I believe, basically runs pretty much underneath there.
Mhm.
So there would be vibration, and as Wayne so correctly pointed out, the Department of Buildings will not allow a structure to be built that, is any danger or whatever. So whatever happens there, they will be involved, and they will figure out, the ground conditions and so on. But the only thing I wanted to add, which I think might be acceptable, is until the owner decides what to do with the property, we might propose that he temporarily allow it to be a public garden. And then, of course, there would need to be a group, and the garden would have to be maintained and such. But I suggest that as an additional option. Thank you.
Steve?
Steve's issue too.
Steve.
Yeah, always.
Steve?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Steve.
For some reason, I can't turn on the camera.
We can hear you.
All right. Well, as the person who first raised this issue, I guess back in 2018, 2019, I absolutely agree with Tracy. Something needs to be done with this site. We got to keep on pushing to get, to try to get this property owner to finally deal with it and not leave it as a blight on the community. I am definitely in favor of reaffirming the resolution that we passed back in 2019 and calling upon him and the city to develop it as a mixed-use building with housing. And the fact of the matter is that before the Rite Aid was there was a building, a 2 or 3 story building that was on that property for decades until I think there was a fire and that building burned down, and then they put up the new Rite Aid structure. So there might, in fact, maybe that Rite Aid structure was not sturdy enough to withstand the subway vibrations. That was only, I believe, a 1 story building. So there may have been issues with the Rite Aid building structure itself. So we know that this property can at least contain some kind of building, and it should have, and there should be something there. Unless we have a group willing to do a community garden, that's not something that I would propose. You would need a lot of people there to actually tend that garden. It's a fairly large site. And I don't think of it as, I disagree with Vivian. I don't think of it as just being a traffic island. You certainly have buildings all over the place that are in the middle of major avenues. This is a reasonably large site, and you could have, I think as the borough president's report suggested, you can have a fairly substantial number of housing units. And in fact, we should refer when we update this resolution, we should refer to the borough president's report and to the fact that it was one of the sites that he recommended for housing. And we should also in the fourth, I don't know, the fourth whereas of the old resolution refers to John Katzimatidis' 2013 campaign for mayor. I would take out that sentence at this point.
Yeah, I agree.
But much of what's in that resolution is still relevant and still could be used. So I am strongly in favor of reaffirming this resolution, and making it tighter, making it stronger, and definitely including the problems with its current condition and how it's not being properly maintained.
Okay. Daniel?
I kind of like want to piggyback off of like what Jim Berlin said. Quite possibly maybe even thinking about making it as a kind of a plaza, as it seems like two buildings were there and two buildings weren't able to be to like stay there steadily. And then there's like an issue with like the whole train thing. Yeah, community garden or a plaza would seem nice. I'm not too sure what the rest of the neighborhood in that area would think. I'm not down there as much, but I know that is a very big open area.
It's a 10,000 square foot site.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a small site.
Yeah.
And Roger Morris Park, where the Morris Janelle Mansion is located, is like a block away.
And you have like a couple of like other areas that are that little street that's I don't even
No, but
think that street is like landmark, but-
my point is that this is something that not we CB12, but I think we citywide need to struggle with, because there is like a 1.4%, they say, vacancy rate which is effectively like 0%. And we need viable sites for development. And it seems like, every time a decent site comes up, someone says, well, let's keep it as a garden. And, if we had a little vest pocket park somewhere, it's one thing, but a 10,000 square foot site is a decent sized, development site, I mean, just based on the reso, that's 50 units. If we did it mixed use, it's more if we did it just residential. So the gardens and plazas may, as an interim use, may be one thing to clean it up. But I think we still need to, as Steve said, push for development, because it's in 2019, this reso was passed. The property owner has done nothing. So it's not going to be a quick turnaround. So there needs to be, I would think, some continued push on the part of the community board to let them know that we do want to see development activity on the site.
Just to sort of sum up to a certain extent, it sounds like we're all saying we need a resolution. It sounds like we're all saying is that more pressure is needed. It sounds like that we all recognize that there's not going to be a building built in the next year. But I think where we're sort of unsure as a committee, maybe can keep talking or thinking or discussing, is in this interim time before the owner of the property decides what he wants to do with his property, is it also effective to ask that it be a community garden or some sort of public space, public-private space in the meantime? Do we think that that's a correct summation of where we're at? Because I guess where I'm at is to sort of, we're not saying it should be a public park. It sounds like the question is should it should we, in our resolution, request a community garden in addition to, sounds like we're still requesting a mixed use?
I would think, and I'm curious what others you think, we're saying that we want to add to the reso, to demand the property owner to maintain the site consistent with applicable laws. We can add to that. And in the interim, while development scenarios are being, developed, to have some type of interim use beneficial to the public on the site.
Can we give an example, like community garden or other, I'm sorry, you were having something.
I think you should put trees there because I think with the lack of water and the amount of effort it takes to run a community garden, as somebody who knows, if you were to put trees there that would absorb, unwanted elements that are in the air, and it would offer shade, which you don't get a lot of around there, and it would take much less work. You don't even know what the source of water is that you would use there. It would seem like you're better off with trees.
Source of water is related to what though?
A community garden. I mean, this is what we.
But you need to water trees as well.
Yeah, but it's easier to water trees than to water. Don't look at me like that. I'm serious, and I think that the combination of shade and absorbing stuff in the air is valuable. I think a community garden, again, people are all enthusiastic and then they keep it up, and it would not absorb the same kind of, because to me, it's still a traffic island, even if it's as big as it is, because you have the two sides, and I just think that you would be better off with something like shade and trees, and maybe a couple of benches to hang out under the shade.
Well, I mean, an interim public use need not be specified, but it can be an interim public use such as a blah, blah.
A blah, blah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, it could be.
I like this idea of like interim public use, for example, community garden, for example, planting trees, for example, just to sort of give some direction to, I just think by leaving it too nebulous without what we as the community, we sort of really open it up to Shenanigan City, sorry.
What will happen if it does become like a public garden and people do actually like it as a public garden, and then after that, they're like, let's build a building, and then.
It's like Elizabeth Street.
Yeah, and then they come saying like, hey, but you guys said like, that would be good as a public garden. Now you guys don't want to build a building.
No, what we said it was good as.
Interim.
Right, and this is where I just want to throw out there.
Because people love their parks and public gardens and stuff, that.
I do too. I guess the thing is that for some reason, like the West Village can have a park every time they throw something, right? And this idea that we have too many parks is not available to us as well. Like, I'm like, so more greenery, but it's not even, it's this.
But it's not an issue of having too many. My comment was, if we wanted to say that this 10,000 square foot site would permanently be another park, it's like, well, we've got a park a block away. If you want to say in the interim, you want to do something that would be used to the public, great. But it's just like with Elizabeth Street, and there are so many other examples where we had, vacant, typically city-owned lots, and in the interim, they became community gardens. And when the city finally had the capital and the political wherewithal to move forward with a real housing program, people don't want housing built there, but they want housing somewhere.
But the distinction in the examples you're giving is public land versus someone's private land. And so I just think we're comparing apples to pineapples. And no, but on trees.
Yeah. So, I mean, not to belabor it, but, public land or private land, we still want it to be clean and maintained.
Right.
And public land or private land, we're still saying in the long run, we want to see something developed there that's beneficial to the community. And public land or private land, we're saying that in the interim, some use that is also beneficial to the community,
such as
enhanced open space, such as da-da-da.
You know what that piece of land reminds you of? That piece of land that's like by Sixth Avenue and Canal Street.
Sixth Avenue, Canal Street.
It's like, the A train's like kind of across the street from it. Every once in a while, they have like little, they have like pop-ups and stuff like that down over there. They haven't like really developed anything on on that site, but it just kind of like reminds me of that, you know?
The distinction is that that area of Sixth Avenue and Canal is not as neighborly. What I mean is it's like right up at the edge of a highway where people come off. There's like less actual foot traffic of people like carrying groceries, doing
Oh, you'll
things
be
right there.
surprised. You'll be surprised in like that little area. Like,
So,
but you have a point. You do have a
I'm
point.
not saying nobody's gonna say,
Yeah.
people don't live
so
there.
coming back uptown
It's an island.
to the Heights, so it sounds like there is support for reaffirming this resolution, tweaking it to make it stronger and to speak to interim use, and also to, do what we were doing about a year ago, is tie it into what the borough president was proposing with their housing Manhattanites. Is there any further discussion on this?
I had a quick question. For community parks, is
And
there
that-
like a liability piece?
Yeah.
I know, but
Indiana.
I don't know what.
Go ahead, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I just couldn't see you.
Oh, okay, sorry. Just one question for the community park that we're talking about, even if it's just temporary, do we have does the city cover liability insurance for things like that, or does the property owner, would they need to cover that?
It won't.
I would think that is a level of detail that we can get more information on, in part from Steve, given his role with parks, but parks and cultural can develop this idea further.
Thank you.
And I did not introduce, we were also joined online by OC Kaminer, another committee member. OC, why don't you say hello?
Hello.
Do you have any
Sorry, I'm not 100%, so
any thoughts or comments on this reso? Or this revised, reaffirmed reso?
I would say revised, reaffirm the resolution.
So is there a motion to revise and reaffirm the reso?
There's a motion to revise the reso.
I'll second it.
So the way the voting occurs is the committee members vote first. Other board members present, so that would be Steve Simon, vote second. And at committee meetings, unlike at general meetings, members of the public can vote and actually can participate. So, if folks had any comments on this, you were free to add them. So committee members in favor. Aye, or raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Jim, Indiana, I don't see you.
I am in favor.
Indiana?
Also in favor.
Okay. So for board members, Steve,
I'm in favor, but I would not support the idea of creating a community garden there.
and any members of the public who would like to vote? I'll begin with people in person. In favor? And then online, if you are in favor, you can also raise your hand. I see Allison is there. Any opposed or abstaining? Thank you. So then I will work on redrafting this and send it around to the committee to make sure we got all the edits and tweaks in the right spot. The next item on the agenda I mentioned is also something that is an outgrowth of ongoing activity. And, last September or so, with HDC, we launched a landmark survey for Washington Heights and Inwood to get input from residents of, buildings and areas they would like to see designated. And that is an ongoing process. But we've received a number of responses, and I think at our September meeting said we wanted to start inviting folks in to discuss those proposals. So the first such discussion is with the proposal that had the largest number of responses, and that's the idea of something Fort Washington, Cabrini Avenue. There were a number of names for a historic district, and so we have a working group for the Fort Washington Historic District joining us this evening. And the Graham, some of us know, but what I will introduce you, and you can introduce the team and take it from there. And the presentation is in fact loaded on that laptop.
Okay, well, thank you, Wayne.
Just make sure that you speak to that.
Oh, I gotta speak into this thing?
Yeah, just as much as you can, that's all.
Well, you just need to speak loud enough so it picks you up.
Okay, I can be pretty loud. So, thank you so much to the committee for all your work and for inviting us in. I'm Graham Serralo. I live in the district under question. I haven't always lived there. I've lived in Inwood. I've lived, bounced around this area, but when the HTC survey came out, there's been a lot of talk in the neighborhood for a long time about, its historic significance and what we'd like to see. I saw this as a great opportunity to pull some folks together to see if we can build some momentum around making this happen. And I reached out immediately to the two experts on this subject, who will be giving the presentation in a minute. Andrew Dahlkirk, who some of you know from Columbia, and Emily Kahn from the New York, I always get it wrong, Historic Preservation Archive, I'm sorry. Yeah, I think, we have a presentation that's very interesting. I just want to say one thing because of the little discussion in the beginning about what parts of Washington Heights folks live in. This area has been called Hudson Heights, right? We are not, note that we are not calling it a Hudson Heights Historic District. We want this to be a Fort Washington Historic District that's connected to Washington Heights, and we want to end that kind of history. It's not a historic name, it was a real estate name. So we're trying to bring that back and kind of recognize the real history of it.
I moved further uptown in '87. And when I moved here, it wasn't called Hudson Heights.
No, it was not until I think the '90s was when that started. And I think, Professor Dahlkirk could talk a little bit more about that maybe. But just wanted to point that out as well. So do you want me to actually work the thing and you can talk?
Yeah. You want to activate that for them, Heidi?
Okay.
I think just hit escape and it's there.
Oh, yeah, I just.
Is there a remote or do we need to?
I don't believe that we have a clicker.
Okay, anyway,
There's-
I'm Andrew Dahlkirk. I'm a professor of historic preservation at Columbia. I was Vivian's thesis advisor, and also Emily's thesis advisor, too. And I live in the neighborhood. My field of expertise is the architecture and development of New York, which is my passion. And so I thought that this was a great area for an historic district for a long time. It centers on two of the most important housing complexes in New York City, but they're set within a larger neighborhood that's really interesting. So I put together a quick kind of history of the neighborhood.
I think that, well, we probably want to get a little bit.
Yeah, you want to get into
Oh, we want that?
presentation mode.
Oh, this thing here? So,
I
is that a touchscreen or? Oh,
That one.
Yeah.
there we go. Okay.
Magic.
And you might want to click that OK to get it out of there.
Yeah, let's get that okay.
Not
All right.
okay.
Okay.
Get this out of there? Yeah, click that as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll take it. Just tell me when you wanna.
They don't see that, we see that.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I put together a slideshow that talks about the neighborhood history. This is, we're just beginning this. So basically, where I would call this a study area, and basically we're thinking about between maybe 181st Street and Fort Tryon Park, and between Fort Washington Avenue and Cabrini. But that remains to be seen a little bit. Clearly, this was a rural area. This is an early 20th century view of one of the bastions from Fort Washington. So there's a long history here going back to the Revolutionary War.
Maybe we get this.
It's open as a PDF for whatever reason, so I would just scroll down.
Oh,
Yeah.
scroll down.
Oh, okay,
Gotcha,
I was
gotcha.
going up. And then, so it remains a rural area. It became a neighborhood of country estates. Libby Castle is one of the most famous, but it amazes me that that was there as late as 183rd Street and 187th Street. Let me
Oh, yeah, sure.
this. This is 1913 too, on Fort Washington Avenue and 183rd Street, where there was a chicken farm. So but the big change was the opening of the IRT in about 1905. It comes up here and led to major development in the neighborhood, largely east of the area we're looking at, and largely south. It went up to about 181st Street, and as you can see here, it is a 1910 image on the southeast corner of 181st Street, in a building that's called the Nathan Hale. Under construction. But at that time, it was still rural, as you can see by looking north on Fort Washington Avenue at 183rd Street, where there's no sign of building at all. That on the left is where Bennett Park would later appear. And the reason for that, and this is a really interesting part of real estate history, is that this is part of the James Gordon Bennett estate. James Gordon Bennett was a newspaper magnate, and it was inherited by his son. And there was a vast amount of land, and basically it stopped development. And that's what they're showing you here. This circled area over here, you can see it's all built up. And then this isn't built up at all. And so what they're telling you, this is an auction brochure, an auction map, is that you should buy land at this auction because this land is ripe for development. So it's after this auction in 1919 that development actually gets going in the neighborhood. So actually the development period of the neighborhood is relatively short, from about 1919 to about 1939 or so. And you can see these are the early buildings. The early construction was relatively modest. They're mostly 5-story walk-ups during this period. And you can see here on the map, this is along Fort Washington Avenue, and those are all 5-story walk-ups there. And this changes in 1924 with the opening of Hudson View Gardens, which is where I live, which is celebrating its centennial this year. That brought the middle class to the neighborhood. It was still quite a hike to the IRT, so Hudson View Gardens actually ran its own private bus that took you there. And here you can see in an early view, and of course, today you're actually looking at my apartment window is on the bottom left there. And so with that, you get a lot of other middle class buildings. These 6 stories means it's an elevator building, as opposed to the 5-story walk-ups. And so there's some were quite modest, like on the left, and some were architecturally quite interesting, like that incredible brick patterning on the Pinehurst Avenue building on the right. These were designed mostly by architects who specialized in apartment buildings, and you can see there's a great variety, kind of medieval Tudor on the left and sort of Gothic on the right, with that's actually
two buildings on the right with one arch, and then it splits into two. But still, in the twenties, it was still a lot of open space. It was still a lot of rural feel. We're looking at 187th Street, and Pinehurst in 1927, and you can see it's still a lot of vacant lots, in the neighborhood. The second major change is the opening of the A train in the early 1930s, which you can see under construction here, and the entrance, which is still there. And that suddenly makes this neighborhood convenient, which it had never been before. And so that's when you get the wave of Art Deco apartment houses. I haven't been putting architects' names in here, but I put these in because Horace Ginsburg and Jacob Felsen were the two best architects of middle-class Art Deco apartment houses in northern Manhattan and the Bronx during this period. And these are really beautiful in the use of different colors of brick and patterns that add to the verticality of the buildings. And of course, they all had corner casement windows, that is the one major alteration that's occurred. Some were a little bit grander. Boke and Paris are best known for their work on West End Avenue and Riverside Drive on the Upper West Side, but here they designed the two tallest buildings of the period in 1936 on 187th Street. Here's more Jacob Felsen. These are the last two buildings on Fort Washington Avenue. And development continued right up to the beginning of World War II. So these are 1941, very, very late buildings. But during this period, the second major apartment complex is built in this area, the 5 towers of Castle Village. Until somebody tells me that I'm wrong, I will say that this is the first Tower in the Park apartment project in America. I'm waiting for somebody to tell me I'm wrong, but nobody has yet. So I'm still saying that. They're towers surrounded by open space. The critics at the time talked about how revolutionary the plan was and how conservative the style of architecture was. They're basically colonial, and in fact, they had shutters on them, faux shutters on the lower 3 floors originally. But these were really radical in their planning. A neighborhood is more than just residential buildings, and so there are institutional buildings in the neighborhood too. The Collegiate Church, which is a Dutch Reformed church, it's still there amidst the additions. On the upper left, the synagogue on the upper right, which was actually built as a Christian Science church. The Mother Cabrini Church on the left, which unfortunately has lost its tower, and St. Elizabeth's Hospital on the lower right, which is now residential. And so that's just my kind of quickie summary of what we're looking at here. So I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Thank you. So my name is Emily Kahn. I was a student of Andrew Dolkart in Columbia's Historic Preservation Program. I wrote my master's thesis on re-envisioning Holocaust commemoration using Washington Heights as my case study. And through that work, I started to really analyze the state of preservation in the community. I do want to note that while I am not a resident of this neighborhood, I do have very strong personal connections to it. My partner was a lifelong resident of this neighborhood. His family still resides in the neighborhood. So it's a place that's very important to us within New York City. So on the screen are screen grabs of the Landmarks Preservation Commission map online. I took these yesterday, so these are as up to date as they can be. You can see on the left, I have a map of all the landmarks and landmark historic districts in Manhattan specifically. And if you look at this, it really tapers off the number of landmarks as you get up north towards Washington Heights and Inwood. For context, the pink dots are individual landmarks. The green are scenic landmarks such as Fort Tryon Park. And then the yellow hidden within all of this are historic districts. So I have a zoom of Washington Heights on the right-hand side, and you can see it's pretty vacant. Notably, there aren't as many individual landmarks as this map makes it seem, because a lot of these are the lampposts, which are landmarked, which is important, but it's a little bit misleading when you look at it. You'll also note that there is a lack of historic districts, especially in the northernmost part of the neighborhood.
There is a Park Terrace, a little Park Terrace district,
Yes,
very little.
Way up.
way up. But you know, pulling out the bigger historic districts right here, actually, what is going on with this? No,
I think you have to hit up.
there we go. Okay. Well, zooming in on some of the more well-known landmarks of Washington Heights. Of course, we have the scenic landmark of Fort Tryon Park. We have the Little Red Lighthouse, Jeffrey's Hooks Lighthouse, the United Palace, which is more recent, of a landmark. And then we also have the Episcopal Church, near, 179th, which was landmarked about 3 years ago. And these are all valuable sites, as well as the districts we have mainly on the southern part of the community. But what you'll see if you really look into the individual landmark designations or the historic district reports is these documents really foreground the architectural significance of the neighborhood. And this is very important, as Andrew noted, talking about real estate development and the Art Deco movement. But that is very much an incomplete look at Washington Heights and its history, and most importantly, its significance. So as I mentioned, my focus is on Holocaust refugees, but what we're hoping with this working group is that people will come forward and talk about the cultural significance of this area to themselves, to their communities. So for example, you know, in these existing landmarks such as Fort Tryon Park, there are stories of Holocaust refugees who use this as their really point of refuge. Their one break a week was walking through the park for coffee and cake. And for those of you who are less familiar with this story, Washington Heights was home to 20,000 German Jewish Holocaust refugees during and after the war. They really made this their home. They shaped the neighborhood. They built a lot of businesses, such as the butcher you see in the middle, as well as numerous synagogues, religious, commercial infrastructure. And the story of Holocaust refugees is not unique in Washington Heights. This is really a neighborhood that has been built up by immigrants, and this is a story that deserves to be celebrated. But within the existing landmarks and historic districts, we do not see this coming through as strongly as it should. So part of my work, especially since this was over COVID and I unfortunately could not have the on-the-ground community presence that I had wanted, was conducting oral histories with Holocaust refugees and their children, all conducted over Zoom. Many of these people left Washington Heights after their childhood, but I wanted to talk to them about what they still felt the neighborhood was like upon visiting. And we have on the left, Gabi, who was a child Holocaust refugee who emigrated as an infant, talking about how when she visited Washington Heights, there really was nothing left for her. There was nothing left that she remembered from her life. She felt that the neighborhood had changed greatly, but she's talking mainly from a commercial perspective. The businesses are not there anymore. In contrast, we have a son of Holocaust refugees, similar age as Gabi, who grew up in Washington Heights, and driving through, he pointed out Castle Village and PS 187 and the intact residential buildings on Pinehurst Avenue, and talking about how they're still there and they have not changed. And there are a lot of development pressures in Washington Heights, and now with the movement, especially from the HDC survey, is really a unique opportunity to try to ensure that the character of this neighborhood that I think everyone in this room loves remains what we hope it can be. So we are working on this district. Graham, do you want to add in anything?
Yeah, no, I just will say, our plan is to ultimately apply for, to the LBC for, landmarking. And of course, we're gonna want, and need a community board 12 support. And also we haven't been in contact really, well, I don't know if you have yet, but, with HTC, to really connect with them on this project, but a lot of work has been done and we're ready to go. So, that's, so we're going to be looking for your support. There is support in the community. Some folks showed up here. I didn't ask them.
You were ready to like present.
Yeah. And we think that especially, as time goes on, we lost Dr. Ruth. We lost some, a lot of connections to that older community that Emily talks about, and we think that's an important part. That's not the whole district, it's a landmark district. But we wanna consider the full history of the area, as well as its architecture and its cultural significance. So we hope that you will support this.
Yeah, I see two hands. I want to point out that Frampton Tolbert from HDC is with us
Okay.
virtually.
Oh, okay.
And also there's been reference to the HDC survey. It's actually a Community Board 12 and
Oh, sorry.
HDC. We're working, together on that.
Let me mention that I'm on the board of HDC, so I will be in touch with you.
Let me mention I'm on the Board of Advisors of HDC, so, there. But, Steve and Indiana, then Vivian.
This is very exciting. We have been talking about creating an Art Deco district in Washington Heights for so many years, and now to have Andrew working on this, especially, gives me hope that maybe it's going to happen. And I'm particularly interested in Emily's research as well. I think there are definitely buildings all along Fort Washington and Pinehurst and Cabrini that deserve recognition, and this is it's a long past due. Now, I am under the impression that Hudson View Gardens is an individual landmark, but maybe apparently that's not true.
It's listed on the National Register, but it's not a city landmark.
Yeah, well, it was, it seems to me it should be, but we should look into that. But we should, well, it'll be part of this district, which is great. Andrew, is it possible that we might have an argument that that especially the two architects that you singled out, I believe they also did buildings along the Grand Concourse in the Bronx that are part of a historic district. Isn't that worth mentioning?
Yes, I said that they were the two best Art Deco architects who worked in northern Manhattan.
But their buildings, aren't their buildings part of the?
Yes,
haven't they already been recognized by LPC?
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Can I say one thing? We should, I believe we should steer away from calling this an Art Deco district, because it privileges the Art Deco buildings over the other buildings, many of which are of equal, if not more, interest.
And I've made that same point time and time again, and the working group is not called an Art Deco, it's just the Fort Washington Historic District.
Right.
That's what our congressman wants.
Right.
Well,
But architecturally, there's more than Art Deco that's represented.
Okay, that's fine. But certainly we're going to mention the Art Deco as a major feature. And I certainly also, Graham, commend the title that you've given this, referring to it as Fort Washington, and making sure that people understand that it's part of Washington Heights.
That's really critical.
Indiana? Indiana?
Thank you. Yes, I am, as you all know, relatively new to this community, and I was wondering, just more generally, like, this project sounds great. Are there like ways to get like the business community excited about this, and so that they can support it, or have similar efforts faced any kind of reservations from the business community? Does it, make their rents go up in their places of business, or anything like any implications, positive or negative, that should be on our radar as we discuss this?
Well, we would certainly like to get the business community interested and involved. I don't think there's any evidence that rents go up if it's a historic district.
Tourism.
Yeah, I can just say that,
Tourism.
so far the outreach has really been to residents, but we have discussed doing, we wanted to do this first, and but also doing some community outreach and meetings around building more support, and that would include business owners for sure.
And when I was doing my research, I talked a lot about the commercial corridor at 187th and Fort Washington Avenue, and thinking about these distinct low-rise buildings. And just thinking about making sure that these businesses can stay in place and not have, even with zoning restrictions, higher buildings going in there with higher rents, so.
Maybe we could stop sharing and then some of the people. It was Vivian, then Jim, then Daniel.
I'm actually the grand niece of, I had several great aunts who lived up there. And they also lived farther down when they first came. One of my aunts actually went to Blocking Fall. Like that was her walk from the Isabella house at the end of her life to get her pushed. But I put in actually, the one thing that I guess you're very locally sort of the physical space. I mean, Frankfurt on the Hudson and all of that and the tea dances, whatever, were where I live, closer to 157th Street. And I used to always interview, well, if I walked around with Frank Hess, I would always ask him questions about around where I am, because he was the first child of a family of 4 who came from Germany, and he was the first person to be born here. So I just wonder, obviously you can't do everything and it makes sense to start, but I would want to say that there's a lot of interesting stuff relating to German Jews in the 150s, the lower part.
And Vivian has just volunteered to help you with that.
On alternate Thursdays.
Jim?
Thank you. Unfortunately, I was called away just at the moment when I saw my home Castle Village flashed on the screen. So if you could reiterate for me, is Castle Village to be part of this district? And the other thing is, does this district, being in this district, especially if Castle Village is in it, does this have the same kind of restrictions that landmarking does?
Well, Castle Village would definitely be within the boundaries of the district. I commented on the fact that I think it's one of the 2 most important, that in the district, there are 2 apartment complexes that are among the most important in the city, and the Castle Village is one of those. And every building that is within an historic district is treated as if it were a landmark, which means that the Landmarks Commission doesn't force anybody to do anything, but if work is going to be done on the exterior of a building, it would need a Landmarks Commission permit.
Yeah, I thought I recognized your voice, Andrew, because you didn't appear, you're there in person. What Castle Village has done in the past, and you're probably aware of some of these people, we have some reasonably prominent architects who live here, and they have acted as Castle Village's own landmarking commission. So when we put in tall windows to create a gym, they had to meet various criteria and cost lots of money. But of course, the appearance of the building was either preserved or enhanced. So that's been, that I cannot speak to what the Castle Village Board will say, but that is how we function up until now. And I'm aware, having been on this committee for a very long time, that exactly how the process works. And the reality, and you live in Hudson View Gardens, so the same reality. Bricks are hardly permanent, so there's endless work that needs to be done. And then we've pretty much done it consistent with what was originally there. But like I said, mostly. So for example, you may or may not recall the roof line of the garage originally looked like Dutch houses. It was really very cute. But when the parapets needed to be repaired, that just became prohibitive. And so that roof now matches what the roofs of the building looks like, more or less. But that original Dutch thing I thought was gorgeous, but it would have been a pretty penny to put it back. And of course, that's the sort of thing that landmarking or historic district would force us to do. On the other hand, just so that this will educate people also, and then I'll stop. As those of us in the know, and others probably aware too, it just has to look right. So, it doesn't have to be built of the same brick and in the same way, with, the architect standing on one foot, which they used to do or whatever. It just has to look right. So, that could have been possibly done, within a reasonable cost factor. I don't know, but that's not what we did in that instance. And this happened probably more than 20 years ago.
Yeah. and-
No, thank you.
And Jim makes a good point that, because I live in, actually, so does Vivian, in the Audubon Park Historic District, and you live in, and it doesn't need to be original, but it needs to be architecturally appropriate. So you can make changes, and so the comment you just made about the roof line of the garage, if it was prohibitive and you came up with something that LPC thought was architecturally appropriate, you might have very well have gotten approval to do that. Daniel.
A cool presentation, very nice. I'll learn a few things here and there. I wonder, and I guess it's just like a comment and maybe a question also for you. I wonder if having a map, because like I get when they go, oh, it's gonna be from 181 to Fort Washington and from here to here. But I wonder if it would help to also have a visual map and like all those buildings that you had, like kind of like highlighted, like, oh, like here's this building, here's that building. I wonder if that would help, like their
We
case.
certainly will have a map, but this is our first step.
Okay, no, it was cool.
Absolutely.
I like.
He's an artist, he can show you a map.
I'm biased. Yeah, I'm biased towards like visuals and all that stuff. So it was just like it was cool seeing all the buildings and like, and I see them. I'm just like, oh, like that's that building that I walk by or that I run by, or that's that building that looks like this, or that's that area that looks like this now. But I guess like for visually impaired people like myself and other people, it would help.
Not visually
Absolutely.
impaired, but visually
It's
focused.
visually focused. There you go. Yeah,
For anybody.
yeah.
I actually have a map that I made through my thesis of the Brook Historic District that we've been sort of keeping under wraps a little bit, just since a lot has changed in 3 years, and we don't want to, since we're still early on in creating this district, we don't want people to think things are definitely included or definitely excluded yet, but we definitely could put that up as a looking point. It's made in story maps with ArcGIS, so it's interactive and people can bounce
I think
around.
it would help because it just in the sense of like, okay, like, yeah, like this person doesn't live here, but like you guys are vouching for this area. It's like,
Yep. And Tracy, was your hand up?
It was twofold. One, it was actually to say something similar, which is was fantastic. But at the same time, I'm sort of like, from where to where, I don't sure. Like, just a little bit.
Who was your
more
father?
clarity. And also I was making a face, and I want to be fair that it wasn't to be disrespectful, but as someone that lives in a landmarked house, it's not easy to make changes. And I'm sure if you live in, I don't even know if these buildings are co-ops or condos or rentals or what, but
Yes.
there's already, I'm sure, mashugana to go through to make things happen. You're now playing extra games with the city, which might be worth it and great. And posterity, that's not the word. Another word,
Yeah.
like I said. I think it's fantastic, but it cannot go without mention that, with great power comes great responsibility, and it's going to have more work.
Right.
So.
But there are two things I would point out. One, Andrew mentioned, and one Jim mentioned. Just because a building is landmark, LPC does not then come around and say, you now must do A, B, and C. So if you are like the property owner for Rite Aid and your building is deteriorating, the building department may come and give you a violation, but LPC has no authority to say you must do something. However, if you're going to do work, then it has to be reviewed. As Jim was pointing out, in my building, which has been in a historic district since 2009, but before that, we were very conscious of the architectural merit of our building, and anything we did, and we had contractors say, oh, well, those windows are too wide. Why don't you make them smaller? Why don't you wrap the terracotta sills with, we did nothing that would adversely impact our building. So when it became, part of our historic district, it was like, fine.
I think that's a dangerous minimizing.
I'm not minimizing. I was simply pointing out that depending upon. No. I was simply pointing out, depending upon
Not my monkeys, not my
what you're going to do. If you live in a landmark brownstone and you were going to, as we've seen some people do, you know, rip the facade off and put vinyl siding, or you're going to do something that would dramatically change the appearance, yes, you could not do that in a landmark district. If you have failing brownstone and you want to replace it with a material that for all intents and purposes looks like brownstone but isn't, yes, you can do that. If you have, you know, wood windows and you want to replace them with metal windows, as long as they architecturally look the same, which is what we did, yes, you can do. So there are things you can do and things that you can't do. But if it looks okay, if it looks architecturally appropriate, you can do it. If you're going to make a dramatic change, you're absolutely right. It's more than Meshuggah. I saw a hand over here, I think.
That was me, yeah.
And your name is?
My name is Emily Stokes. Hi, nice to meet all of you. We've been working with Graham on a couple of these issues as well, and we also just wanted to add two things. One of the other things we thought would make this makes this a historic district is the fact that the name Washington Heights came from Washington's battle up there, which is in part of this district as well. It's part of it is Bennett Park. That as well as when we're discussing the Art Deco architecture, a lot of that actually is past the line that we had discussed. Bennett Avenue, as well as Overlook Terrace, and even all the way over to Wadsworth Avenue, Wadsworth Terrace even. A lot of that architecture is also part of this Art Deco that we've seen, they so lovingly put in this amazing presentation. The Art Deco Society of New York City actually does have a map that is of that area and does show a lot of those landmark areas as well. And I'm happy to email that to whoever.
That would be great. We also have with us another committee member joining us on Zoom. That's Chris Whitaker. Chris, say hello when you have your hand up. So the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Sorry, I'm running a little late. Sorry, I missed some of your presentation, Andrew and Emily. But thank you for presenting. A kind of esoteric question that I'm researching that I'm curious, Andrew or Emily, if you might have an answer to this. So say I'm Fort Washington Collegiate, or say I'm the co-op board of Hudson View Gardens, and I decide, and it's 2030, and I decide that I want to put solar panels on my roof. And for the case of Fort Washington, they're going to be very visible on that roof right from the street. And Hudson View maybe decides that there's a great wind turbine design that the co-op approves. What's the current state of the law in terms of putting renewable energy infrastructure on these buildings, as far as you understand it?
So the Landmarks Commission has been working very diligently to deal with climate issues, and they've been approving solar panels on rooftops. Mostly they have looked for ways to minimize their visual impact. But I think that on their website, they have something about landmarks and climate and solar, because they've been very proud of the work that they've been doing on that subject. Wind turbines, I don't think that's come up yet.
Yeah, and another real life example, as I mentioned, you know, my building is in a historic district and we have solar panels on the roof, but they're installed so that they're flat. And going back to the prior conversation, if you can't see it from the public right of way, which is the street, then LPC has no issue with it. The fact that Vivian's building is taller than my building, and you could see the roof, but that's not from the public right of way. But across Broadway from where I live, there's a building that's not in the district. They're installed so that the solar panels are sitting on rigging that's basically a story tall. So in a historic district, that type of installation, I doubt you would get approved. But if you're installing it so that it's flat on the roof and you can't even see it, I don't see LPC have an issue with that. Wind turbines, once again, you would see. So I don't know how that would work.
No idea.
Wayne, this is Frampton.
Hey, Frampton.
We have seen LPC approving visible solar panels on secondary facades under their new rules. And HTC has been very supportive of that.
Good to know. Are
Thank you.
there other questions, comments? Heidi?
I also echo the desire for a map because now I'm
Confused.
forgetting, and also with the discussion about like Wadsworth and stuff. So just to be clear, what are the external boundaries you guys have in mind?
Well, for the study area, not for a proposed historic district, because we're not there yet.
Right.
We were thinking about looking from 181st to 190th from Fort Washington to Cabrini. But that could change, but that was the initial idea.
Yeah,
Because that's the area that was historically called Fort Washington.
I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't mention that that pretty much lines up exactly with the part of this neighborhood that was considered first grade during redlining. Which is why the discussion about like Wadsworth and down the hill, I just think that we should.
No,
mention that,
it's
put it on the table.
funny you should mention it, and I see you, Jim, but at the Center for Architecture, there've been a couple of discussions, and it's ongoing, sort of the legacy of redlining. And after attending one of those, I pulled up the map in Manhattan, and the areas where you have, better or worse residential conditions reconcile quite nicely with areas that were and were not. And what folks have been calling Hudson Heights, that was one of the areas up here that was not redlined. And this whole east and west of Broadway, there's some historical truth to that, because if you look east and west of Broadway, the colors on the map change. So in looking at the historic district, it'll be great if we don't do something that kind of reinforces that legacy. And the other thing that you mentioned, we've also talked about the degree to which Upper Manhattan in general is underrepresented when it comes to designations. And although in the map you showed a number of dots in Harlem, I remember when Ruth Messenger was borough president, and Michael Henry Adams did the Heritage on the Heights presentation in her office, because at that time, there might have been 2 designated buildings in Harlem, but the whole idea was, and Michael put it in a less subtle way than I will, that it seemed that LPC was more interested in preserving things that were downtown as opposed to uptown, even if in some cases the buildings were designed by the same architect. And in the case of the Beaumont, was exactly the same, as a building downtown. So
And the Vauxhall as
yeah.
well.
And so, I mean, while there is some progress made in Harlem, there's still more that needs to happen, and there's even more that needs to happen in, Washington Heights and Inwood. Jim.
Thank you. I have a bunch of scattershot comments. In terms of the peaked roof of the church, there are solar cells manufactured that look like roofing elements, shingle like, so, that might help. Essentially, wind turbines are generally never installed on top of structures, because even the best of them vibrate in ways that, earlier structures were not designed to deal with. So that's sort of moot. In terms of the legacy of redlining, obviously we don't want to reinforce any future redlining, but on the other hand, as part of the education we're always trying to do, I think it may be important to remind, people that there was redlining. And then the other piece of this sort of, some of it is, almost apparent redlining, because, and Andrew knows this extremely well, Washington Heights was developed in 2 stages. First, when the 1 train came, they built all the stuff along Broadway and stuff. And then when the I&D came, the A train, there was development to the west of that. So all those buildings to the west, which were of course in this red line zone, they were all they were significantly newer, and they all had elevators, while the construction that was done when the subway was built, which got up here around 1911, I believe, somewhere around there, there was still a large number of walk-ups, and walk-ups are inherently less desirable in general than elevator buildings. So, but again, that's an important heritage. We live with it. It actually makes probably doing the equity we would like to do harder to do than it should be. But we do, this is something we've inherited, and we, being aware of it, that it's there, is very important. So I'm glad all these issues are coming up.
And Heidi's comment reminded me of something I was thinking of earlier, because in thinking about Fort Washington, I also think about the sort of the lower end where it begins, and there's some very interesting sort of smaller courtyard buildings, not as grand as like Graham Court, but there's a whole series of them. And it is, I think, far enough south so it doesn't connect as closely to this proposed district, but is there interest in looking at, Fort Washington more broadly, and perhaps suggesting multiple districts that merit designation?
Well, I think that's probably something that the HDC survey will come up with.
Yeah, I think, if I can speak to that just for a second, because I know that one question, Wayne, it seems like the committee had was beyond this district, which a lot of people expressed interest in, what else on that list was of interest to writing RFEs for or exploring further. So maybe once the committee decides how to support or move forward with this project, we could at a future committee meeting have a discussion about what else is on that list. And if you all want to pursue other items, I think HCC would be very supportive of helping to write RFEs and getting some of those, especially the individual landmarks outside of this area, getting more of that research done.
Yeah, I was just interested in, some of the images that showed, Fort Washington Avenue basically as a rural road. And, I'm sure that coming further south, that may also have been the case. But I just think architecturally, having, the series of buildings, you don't really find them elsewhere, in Upper Manhattan, to my knowledge. Jim, is that an old hand or a new hand?
It's actually a new hand, because I actually have personal familiarity with the courtyard buildings you're talking about, because my uncle used to live in one when I was a kid. And as you walk, you walk through, there's an inner courtyard, which means you're walking under apartments as you get in. But next to the doorway were these two lions, and I loved the lions. So I remember these well. They're very interesting buildings.
I think the lions are still there.
They're still there. I looked at it for you.
So I would say that there are a lot of buildings in the neighborhood that would probably be potential individual landmarks. Like one of the best middle-class courtyard buildings that I know is the Broad Dyke on Dykeman and Broadway, which is fantastic building. And there's in your suggestion of going east of Broadway, there's one of the great Art Deco 6-story buildings is on can't remember the name of the street.
Wadsworth?
On Wadsworth Terrace, yeah. One of the great Art Deco buildings of New York.
Chris?
Thanks. Two sort of intertwined questions for Emily and Andrew, and maybe Wayne as well. Could you just give an overview of, well, first question is, LPC can confer on this and landmark things basically unilaterally. Is that correct? And adjacently, how much community support beyond the community board are we looking for as like a threshold or gauge of whether or not we've got the neighborhood behind us in this kind of effort?
So legally, landmarks can hold a public hearing on anything. And as long as it fits the rules, like it's 30 years old, and they can designate it whether the owner is in favor or not. But that does not happen very often anymore. It has happened in the past to save a building. But having community support and owner support is important, and Landmarks takes that into consideration. So there's a lot of work to be done before this can get before the Landmarks Commission.
Yeah, I would just add that, like we said, we're really at the beginning here. I mean, a lot of the preliminary groundwork has been done and research has been done. But as far as community outreach and getting community buy-in and all that, that's work that we're starting. And I think that a lot of the comments that are made here, including looking at other areas, looking at Bennett, that's huge. That's what we need, because we want this to be a partnership with CB12. And we need some guidance on how to do that. And we're trying to look at what will get past LPC and accepted, which is its own.
Exactly, yeah.
But I just want to add that.
Yeah, and I think Vivian is next, but I wanted to say that, months ago, we were discussing, sort of what the next steps were. And we made it clear, the whole intention of the CB12 HTC survey was not for us to come up with the ideas of what should be landmarked, but rather to ask residents, what you see as being, buildings or areas of importance. So the, Chris, the whole idea of community support and community input is, I guess, integral to the approach we're taking. It's, what do you want to see happen? And then if there is a group of stakeholders, if there's a constituency for that, they will be the one advocating for it.
Yeah, if I can follow up, I'd love to hear from the gentleman there. So to play devil's advocate, when there are community members who say, this is paternalistic, I'm in the co-op, I run the co-op board, great, I don't need landmarks standing over my shoulder. Maybe we want to do some renovations or some energy upgrades that are going to be a pain through the Landmarks Commission. When they say this is going to raise property values in the neighborhood and gentrify things in a negative way, what is kind of like the theory of? I know this is a very basic question, but beyond the idea that we want to save these beautiful this beautiful architecture, how can I answer the community when they sort of push back and say, why is this necessary?
Andrew, you probably, and Emily, you probably have more experience, in the actual landmarking process than I do. But I have some ideas. I don't know if you want to answer that.
No, go ahead.
No, I mean, I think that this is all part of the outreach, Chris. I mean, I think that we have to listen first. I mean, I think we have to say that this is something we want to do. This is something that, has interest, HTC is involved, Community Board 12 is involved, we have residents, but we want to, at this point, we want to present and we want to listen, right? So if there's a lot of opposition to being included, in this area or whatever, then, we have to take that into account. So I think the listening part is important first before, we start arguing or negotiating or anything like that. So I don't have an answer on really how to push back or answer their questions at this point. I think it's really just, let's listen to, let's see how people feel about it.
Mostly the Landmarks Commission works very well with owners to get what they want done. But if it's really inappropriate, Landmarks can say no. I live in Hudson View Gardens, and I wish there had been a Landmarks Commission 40 years ago when they started putting on Portland cement mortar. And there was no Landmarks Commission to say, no, you can't do that, it's not appropriate. So half of our buildings are slathered with mortar that's damaging the brick. And sometimes Landmarks will come in and say, no, that's not the right way to do it. I think ultimately that's a good thing.
I also think it's worth commenting that, as Andrea noted, this is not just a residential district. This is a district that we're hoping to propose that will cover a lot of community resources, churches, open spaces, and the idea that there can be some protection for these spaces that really benefit people on a day-to-day level. So thinking about the community beyond just individual buildings as well.
And I see that. I just also want to point out that, is it the New York City Preservation Law of 1966? 65? So
60th anniversary.
there was no LPC to say it was a mistake to tear down Penn Station. And all of the work folks are doing now to try to recreate that experience, and still not quite coming up to par. But that preservation law says preservation can be based on architectural merit, historical merit, or cultural merit. And I think LPC does a poor job of looking at history and culture. And that's one of the things that has been discussed in the context of another proposal, but it's also something that this committee discussed and, was urging LPC to give more attention to preservation that looks at the history and culture of the people that are also associated with that. And what's interesting is when they were looking at designating Dizzy Gillespie's residence, which initially they turned down because it was just an ordinary building, and why should we designate that? And probably one of the things that came out of the murder of George Floyd is, folks started looking at it differently. So, it came up again, and, they were looking at that, and they were looking at not because it's an architecturally significant building, but because of its connection to Dizzy Gillespie. And it's interesting how the same building, the same cultural historic connection, going to the same agency is rejected and then brought up and considered because there's a mindset change. So, when some folks say it's paternalistic or whatever, it's like, well, I would depend on, what is it that we're seeking to acknowledge and, preserve? And, one might argue, as we pointed out, that, LPC, often hasn't done a good job of acknowledging and preserving things that are related to African-American history. And, preserving that would not be paternalistic. It'll be like catching up and you got a long way to go.
Yeah, so speaking about cultural significance here, so once again, this is just one part of the story, but this is my area that I focus on. This would be the first historic district that explicitly calls out Holocaust refugees and that culture as part of the significance. This is a story that's really been ignored in New York City, New York State, beyond. Also opportunity to look at other refugee and immigrant cultures that maybe these stories have been highlighted on the Lower East Side, but have not extended towards, other very prominent neighborhoods. So I think what we have here in this district under development is a dual tactic of highlighting the architecture and the cultural heritage to try to, both appease LPC and make sure we have something that, spreads awareness about the diverse history of this place.
Vivian and then Jim.
Two separate things. In terms of some of the history, I don't know if you know, but a number of years ago, a bunch of us up here were involved in a project, an oral history project with the New York Public Library. And they had gone out and they'd done maybe 10 neighborhoods in the city. It was called something like, they gave us a corny name of like Bridging Our Story or something, but it's there. It's hard to find if they're there. And some of the people like Craig Hess, for example, of German Jewish background are part of those interviews. In fact, I interviewed Jim Berlin of all people.
Of all people.
Of all people. That's one thing. And the other thing I wanted to say is that there are those 5 on Fort Washington, as you turn on 159th to start it, there are 5 or 6 houses. On one day I went out and started taking pictures of them that all are those courtyard buildings. And one of them has a Native American head on it. And one is called the Daytonian. I'm trying to think of I think they're all rental buildings. So you'd have landlords who hated you, but it would still.
Or not.
I don't know, but they're destroying the insides of them. That's true. Yeah.
But landmarks wouldn't
care about
it's
it.
not they would. I mean,
Yeah.
it's most landmarks. That's the other thing. Are It's just the exterior that is considered relevant, and you can completely renovate the inside as long as it doesn't impact what you see from the street.
It's true.
Jim?
There you go. Thank you. As Vivian pointed out, I'm one of the individuals who are part of this oral history. And I commend you to listen to my oral history, not because it's interesting, but you will see the work of an excellent interviewer. So seriously, and that's part of what I'm talking about now, because the word refugee, which may be the best word we have, is not quite as inclusive as it might be. Because one of the reasons all these refugees from the Nazis came here is because there was already a strong German Jewish community in the neighborhood that was able to sponsor them and bring them over. And these earlier people, I suppose technically my parents, one who came in 1929, the other in 1930, they met here. They were economic refugees from Germany, but they weren't. So in some sense, the word refugee is appropriate. But again, this distinction as this district is developed is also significant because, and in fact, if you were to listen to my oral history, you'll hear the chicanery that was necessary to bring some of these people over. So, yeah. So again, I applaud this, and you know, but as an old person, I think we should preserve history. Maybe even young people think this.
Yeah, Steve.
Yeah, hi. I had to step away to attend actually another community board meeting. So if I repeat something that's already been covered, please let me know. I think I have three different things to mention. Number one, I thought what I heard Chris Whitaker ask was whether or not there was a downside to a landmark designation in terms of a negative impact on rents, perhaps. Would landlords be demanding higher rents because these buildings now have landmark designations? And I don't know if there's any reason to believe that, but I wonder whether either Frampton or Andrew can, they have more experience dealing with these issues. I wonder or not whether they can address that particular question. And then I have two other things I want to say.
Yeah, I mean, we have done studies that show there's no, direct correlation there because the LPC does not control use of those does not control the use of a building. So we have shown that rents generally remain the same as the areas immediately outside of the historic district. So they're not skyrocketing within the historic district compared to a block or two away. We're also doing a lot of work right now on how preservation supports rent stabilized housing and rental buildings because it's disincentivizing, especially for smaller walk-up buildings. It's disincentivizing demolition of those buildings, which is one of the few ways that landlords can evict everyone, is by demolishing the building to build luxury. So by preserving those buildings, it does incentivize keeping those rent stabilized units, of which we're losing all over the city.
Okay, well, that would be an important point to reinforce. Emily, I would want to recommend to you, if you're not already aware of these things, there was a pretty good documentary that was done, I don't know, maybe 15 years ago. No, longer than that, maybe over 20 years ago, about the German immigrants who came to Washington Heights called We Were So Beloved. You should take a look at that documentary. In fact, Frank Hess's family was among those interviewed for that documentary. And there are a couple of books, Frankfurt on the Hudson and Crossing Broadway by Robert Snyder, which also deal with the subject. You may want to take a look at those books as well.
Historiography directly, this is the type of research that's gone into this. So I have a copy of We Were So Beloved apartment right now.
I'm sorry?
I have a copy of We Were So Beloved in my apartment. That was my first research.
Oh, great.
Looking at great tests, yeah. So that's the type of research that has gone into forming this district. And Robert Snyder's book, Crossing Broadway, talking about various immigrant groups, has also been very pivotal in this research. But definitely looking for suggestions to make sure we've covered our basis on, what we should look at. But We Were So Beloved it's a great documentary.
Yes, I would love to see it again. Did you say you've already picked up, you have Frankfurt on the Hudson as well?
Yes, I have a very destroyed copy of Frankfurt on the Hudson that's been very well loved. The author passed away shortly before my research started, so
yes,
I took great inspiration from being able to, highlight his memory in light of, him passing early in the COVID pandemic.
Right.
But yes, it is a severely beaten up copy at this point. It is the only book I think I bought instead of rented from the library because I needed it so much.
All right. Well, if I can find it, I probably have a book, a copy that's in better condition. The last thing is, I'm wondering, and maybe again, either Frampton or Andrew could respond to this. Would it make sense for us at this point, for you guys, to approach LPC staff to see how receptive they might be to this possible historic district, and whether they might have some pointers or things that they might want to tell us should be included in the proposal?
I think it's premature at the moment. I think we need to come up with a firmer proposal and do the background, put together the background research, and then present it to Landmarks. Not as a fait accompli, but as something to discuss. But I think that it would be premature to go to them now.
All right. Well, I certainly trust you on this. Thank you.
Indiana?
Thank you. Again, for those of us who are newer to this, can somebody do a quick recap of what the timeline would be for considering this?
9 years.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And I mean, honestly, one of the main reasons I was asking was just, is there anything like from City of Yes that we should keep in mind as we're considering this, or that would support this, complicate this, anything like that? Any flags?
I think that, historic districts and City of Yes are two different animals, and we joke, but it can take, there is no real timeline. I think it took 7 to 9 years for the Audubon Park district to be designated, and that was considered fast.
How many years? I'm sorry?
9.
9. Okay.
Landmarks doesn't have to do anything. So we can propose and they can do it right away, or we can propose and they can ignore it.
Or they could say no, as they've done.
Say yes.
Yeah. So
we do the best job that we can as members of the community, and as members of the community board, and we hope for the best.
I will say, we had a meeting with LPC recently, and they said they are getting very few historic district proposals submitted. So now may be a good time to submit this.
I wonder why.
Well, right, exactly. And we are reiterating all the ones we are submitting back to them, all the ones that people asked for that they never moved on.
I had just one small follow-up question. The buildings, when they are designated as a landmark, do they have extra, they do, I guess, have extra hoops that they have to jump through when they want to make changes externally, but you mentioned that internally they can renovate, they can change use or all of that without having to go through LPC?
Well,
New York Landmarks hidden to deal with use. So use is not, if you're doing work on the interior that does not need a buildings, you are free to do it. It does need a buildings permit. You have to get go to the Landmarks Commission, get what's called a certificate of no effect.
Exactly.
A certificate of no what?
No effect.
Okay, thank you.
So it is 8:45. I think it would be fair to say that there's a great deal of support and enthusiasm for this proposal. And, you know, the committee would be happy to have further discussions and to have more neighbors come and discuss how they'd like to shape it. And you let us know how how HDC can be of assistance.
And the fact that you're here physically as opposed to on Zoom is amazing. We never see anyone in.
We're showing up for this.
Yeah, we're here for.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Important to be your person.
Yeah.
But let me put it, if there were 40 people on Zoom supporting this, we wouldn't say, oh, no, we don't want to talk to you. It's like, the point is, we undertook the survey to get input, and we're glad to get the input.
Heard.
Thank you.
Heard.
Thank you.
Could Steve Simon mute himself, please?
Stifle yourself,
Thank
Steve.
you.
Is there any old business?
Oh,
Is there any new business?
absolutely not.
No,
Is there a motion to adjourn?
motion for adjourn.
Second.
We are adjourned at what, 9:46?
I meant to bring
Oh, you
calendars.
architects.
8:45.
You architects
The
always
18th
believe.
Everyone.